So, my name again is Erin McConnell, and I am the Manager of Corporate Communications at TransLink. Thank you very much for joining us here today. And with me to my immediate right is Ian Jarvis, who is our CEO of TransLink, as well as Jeff Cross, who is our Program Manager for Planning at TransLink. So for those of you joining us on the telephone tonight, you will have an opportunity to ask questions later on, as well as the folks who have joined us online via the web. You'll be able to see the slide presentation as we go forward. And just to get us started tonight, before we get into our 2012 base plan and 2012 supplemental plan, which is entitled Moving Forward, we'd like to show you a brief video about TransLink and who we are and what we do. So with that, I'll turn it to the video.
We get a lot of positive feedback. You know, people just walking up to us saying, hey, it's great to see you here. We're glad you're here.
With accessible transit, I can travel anywhere in the Lower Mainland, and it's changed my life for me. It's just opened up the world for me.
And that concludes the video. So now I'd like to pass it over to Ian Jarvis, our CEO, to walk through both the base plan as well as the supplement plan.
Right. Thanks, Erin. So the purpose of this evening is to really to provide an overview of two plans that we're currently consulting on. The first is what we refer to as a base plan, and in simple terms, that's a plan that we outline the programs and projects and services that we're going to provide within our existing level of revenue. So what we can do with basically the resources that are available to us at that time. The second plan, and so the base plan, we refer to it, you'll see on the screen, as a funding stabilization plan. The second plan is what we refer to as a supplement, and the supplement is a plan where we require additional investment and additional revenues and resources and borrowing, that we prepare a supplemental plan. And so we're required by legislation each year to do a base plan to outline what we're going to achieve within our existing resources. We can bring forward a supplement at any time of the year when a need is identified to move forward with additional investment. So we're bringing forward a supplemental plan at this time, really building from a plan, the same plan that was consulted on in the fall of 2010, where we outlined a number of investments, a plan that had significant support from the public. We took that plan forward after consultation to the Mayor's Council, who is required to approve a supplemental plan. because there was comfort with respect to the funding proposal that was outlined in the plan, that was not voted on. We're in a situation where there is a framework that's been agreed to by the mayors and the province of BC. So we're bringing that plan forward at this time to seek input and in the end take it after consultation, take it forward to the mayors for a decision relative to approval of that plan. So on to the next slide. And so this is really a really important slide from TransLink's perspective, because it outlines in terms of our priorities of investment where we're going to put our dollars. So our order of priorities as an organization and a transportation agency, and these are principles that are utilized really in the industry. First is our dollars go to maintain those existing levels of service. We have customers that rely on those services that were out there, so our priority is to maintain those services. The second is we have tremendous public investment in assets, and as good stewards of those assets, we need to maintain them in a state of good repair. So kind of the second priority is maintaining those assets in a state of good repair. And those that own a home or assets, vehicles, etc., the same principles that you would apply in your household. The next order of priority is upgrades. So where we have infrastructure that's kind of exceeding its original design capacities. For example, on the Expo line, which was built in the mid-'80s, we have a number of stations where the volumes of passengers that are going through those stations are being exceeded. So we need to put dollars into upgrading those stations to deal with the demands that are on those assets. The last, and it is an important priority, is expansion. So once we've dealt with those basic priorities, solid priorities, we go to expansion. So the key principle is we don't want to put our existing level of service, existing assets at risk before we make a decision to invest in expansion in the system. So I know the first thing that when we consult on asking for additional resources to make needed investments, they say, well, why can't you just do more with what you have? And certainly the funding that we are, levels that we're working within today are the levels that were approved back in the fall of 2009. So those of you that follow TransLink and TransLink Manager can remember we stabilized our funding with some additional funding provided through 3 cents of fuel tax and some fare increases, as well as an increase in our parking sales tax. With the benefit of those additional dollars, we really stabilized our funding and have adequate financial resources to pay for the existing services we provide today. But what was assumed in that, when that plan was approved, that really those additional revenues weren't enough, that there was assumed that we would have to and need to find cost reductions and efficiencies within our existing programs. And so when we, going back to 2009, we eliminated $20 million out of our 2009 budget, and going forward into 2010, we took an additional $30 million out of it, and really concentrating on non-direct service, so those administrative, indirect cost areas, really focusing on reducing those administrative costs. And if you look at benchmark our administrative costs as a percentage of our overall budget, I mean, we do quite well. I mean, in terms of our TransLink indirect costs, 3% of our total budget, which is, in my view, a really good benchmark, and I would encourage folks to compare that to other transportation agencies. So the good news is, unlike a number of other major metropolitan areas, we have stable funding to provide the level of services that we provide today. And actually, level of service isn't really a good way of putting it, because really it's to provide the envelope of service hours that we have available to us. So we know we've got more people moving to the region, we have increased demands on our system, and so there's not resources within our existing funding envelope to provide for growth. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, who's going to kind of outline in those categories that I highlighted in terms of maintaining our existing level of service and assets in a state of good repair. Just exactly what is included in the base plan.
Thanks, Ian. So Ian mentioned that we're maintaining our services at the current envelope, and that's 6 million hours of vehicle service a year, and that's a lot of service. Just as a checkpoint, an average bus does about 3,500 hours of service a year, so that's a lot. But we have not increased service since basically the fall of 2009, and we're maintaining that overall envelope. As Ian mentioned, we're trying to get more out of our existing resources, so many people are aware. We're continuing to optimize those services and look for areas where we can reallocate services that are maybe not performing as well as they could be to areas where there are really high needs and they can return more riders and greater rider revenues from fares as well.
And if I could jump in there, Jeff, that's really a continuation of what Ian was speaking to before, which is our service optimization and really being as efficient as we can with what we've got. So with respect to the 2012 base plan, you're looking at that continuing moving forward. Is that right?
Absolutely. We had outlined that as an ongoing program. That's something we should be doing all the time. But as part of that 2010 funding stabilization plan, we said we needed to hit a certain target.
The other thing, Jeff, I should have emphasized is really in terms of our where we are and within our current context, we came off 5 years of unprecedented growth. There's a significant amount of expansion that was implemented 2005 to 2009. About a 35% increase in transit service hours, the opening of the Canada Line, the Golden Ears Bridge, additional rail capacity on the Expo Line as well. And so, every good business, you put those services out there, you gotta check and monitor to make certain that the productivity that you assumed is there, and make those adjustments again to target the service hours where they'll best meet the needs of our existing customers. And I don't want to underplay that when we make changes like this, it has an impact on individual customers. We recognize that, but we're trying to make decisions and apply our resources to what's best for the entire system and all our customers.
And so to maintain those services, we continue to have to actually replace fleet in order to keep those hours on the road. So over the course of the 3 years of this plan, we're estimating that we'll replace 240 diesel and hybrid buses, another 107 community shuttles, and another 155 handy-dart vehicles.
So actually on those replacements, I want to emphasize that in a lot of cases, we're as old buses are taken out of the system, we're replacing them with buses that are more environmentally friendly.
That's right. In 2012, we're estimating about 40 of the diesel buses will be replaced with hybrids. So then we enter into state of good repair, and beyond our bus replacements, we have to maintain our exchanges, our facilities, our guideways, all those kinds of things. So we invest a lot in train control systems, alarms, upgrades to propulsion for the SkyTrain to keep it running smoothly and keep our downtime to a minimum. We also continue to maintain the roads and work with our municipal partners. We spend about $35 to $36 million a year that we share with the municipalities to maintain the major road network, and that continues through 2012 and 2014. And we also have a $10 million a year program for minor road capital improvements.
So we use the term major road network. It's probably worthwhile kind of pausing and just outlining just exactly what that is. Jeff, can you do that, or would you like me to have a go at it?
I can help.
Okay.
My understanding is that right now we have about 2,300 kilometers of lanes in the major roads and bridges in the region that we help maintain that are designated as kind of arterials and above that are of regional significance. And so to assist the municipalities in maintaining those, since they run through their jurisdictions, we provide operating maintenance and rehabilitation funds every year.
So in addition to the major road network, of course, we also have responsibility to own the Patella Bridge, the Knight Street Bridge, the Westham Island Bridge out in Delta, as well as, of course, the Golden Ears Bridge.
Absolutely. And finally, in state of good repair, we continue to invest in bike capital. Biking is an important modal facet of our mandate, and we put $3 million a year into biking capital right now. As Ian mentioned, when facilities start to reach their capacity and require replacement, or we look for strategic upgrades, and we have a number of those in the course of the 3 years of this plan. The key ones being Hamilton Transit Center construction. We have some upgrades for safety and security and operations at the C-Bus terminal both in Lonsdale Quay and on the Vancouver side, and we have some SkyTrain station upgrades.
So again, Hamilton Transit Center, that's a transit facility in East Richmond that's meant to service New West Burnaby as well as Richmond and Delta Surrey. So it's a key location that enables us to more effectively provide service today, and also sets us up for expansion when it comes. And in terms of the Patella Bridge rehabilitation, I mean, people will probably be reading the press saying, well, aren't you replacing that bridge? Well, yes, we are. It is our intention. It's at the end of its useful life, but we do need to put dollars into maintaining it until the day comes when it's replaced.
And indeed, that's something that we would be consulting on in the coming months.
Right. The Patella Bridge.
The Patella Bridge, that's right.
I'd like to hit a few others. There's some customer service upgrades that we're looking at that have been identified in the previous years and are being delivered in the next 3 years, and some of those are Smart Card and Fairgate project. Some upgrades to the TransLink mobile site, since more and more people are relying on that, and enhancing the interactivity of the website.
So what we mean by that is today, existing customers may be familiar with Next Bus, but what we're talking about is those that have mobile devices. Actually, the ideal situation where we're headed is getting real-time information when you can expect that bus to be at your stop.
That's right, and we're actually looking at launching that this September, and we've had a lot of people on the Buzzer blog and on our websites and emailing into us in great anticipation, and also, of course, on Twitter. So we'll launch the first phase of that project in September this year, and then we're going to follow up with the full-fledged app. So we will have that predictive, real-time bus information for folks.
Thanks, Aaron.
And we continue to plan for the future, even though we're in a base plan environment right now, and we've identified a new supplemental that we're bringing forward. So we look at ongoing needs for the region. Some of those have been the rapid transit studies that many people are aware of that will continue through the course of this plan. We also have the Transport 2045 update. That's our long-range plan that looks out 30 years plus, where the region's going to be and what we should do to get there. We also are looking at a goods movement strategy that will be rolled into that update to the long-range plan starting almost immediately.
Yeah, so this is another area where, again, I get comments and I'll say sometimes criticism. They say when you've got a system in many of our routes that's full, why are you spending money on long-term studies when you should be putting that money into direct service? Well, we know that, and we'll talk about it more later, is that we have the challenge of, and our customers tell us, I mean, we have a lot of areas in our service area that we need additional capacity. We recognize that, but you got to plan for the future. We know there's 1 million more people coming to this region. Gas prices are going up. We need alternatives for folks to plan and utilize the system, and you need to do those studies so that you can make smart investments for the future.
And I think it's also important to note, just to launch off that point, Ian, that in addition to this long-range planning that we do, that almost always involves public consultation and really hearing from our customers, our stakeholders, and the public on what their priorities are.
Well, maybe that's a good segue into where we're going with this plan, what it kind of wrap it up on this base plan. So it's a huge plan. We are a big operation. We're projecting revenues right now of $1.2 billion over the course of 2012. And the major sources of those, and why we've continued to be quite stable relative to our many of our peer agencies, we have a broad range of sources. We have about 26% comes from property tax, 27% from the regional fuel tax, and 38% comes from transit fares. From an expenditure perspective, The vast majority, or I should say half, most of our operations are in bus, and that represents 48% of our operating expenditures. Rail is just under 20%. Roads and bridges are around 4%, and planning for the system is about 6%. And debt service, which is for capital expenditures, runs about 21%.
So one of the things I can't remember if we covered off when we went through the elements of the plan, the capital plan itself, when you add all those expenditures up in terms of maintaining existing services, keeping our assets in a state of good repair, and some upgrades, what's that total package?
That's significant, even in a base plan environment. That runs about $950 million over the 3 years, and we're estimating that roughly half of that will come from senior government funding for capital.
Okay.
So where does this get us? We're very focused now on outcomes as a performance-based organization, and we have very ambitious objectives and targets for the region that are outlined in Transport 2040 that we're going to hit. And currently, our mode share is roughly 75% by private vehicles, 13% by transit, 11% by walking, and 2% by biking. And we're able, with this plan, to continue to make some modest progress in the first year as we see more and more riders flood to the system. We're continuing to have higher fuel prices. We're having a very successful UPass program, so we are getting more and more out of our existing services. However, after about 2012, we start to taper off, and we just can't accommodate any more people, and they look for alternative modes to that. So we'll start to lose progress against our regional goals. And our regional goals are basically, just to remind people, for 2040, the majority of trips should be transit, walking, and cycling, and 50% minus one by private vehicle.
So those are pretty bold objectives we set for ourselves as a region, and really trying to aspire what we understand, the values of this region, what we become. But I think if we reflect on our experience during the Olympics, when at that period of time we had additional investment in transit, we had priority on our road system given to priority trips. We encouraged people to use transit through incentives, and encouraging people to vary their work hours, etc., to support it. Increased park and ride capacity, and the Olympics. If you think where the venues were, they were on a corridor well served by transit. So you put all that mix together, and that's kind of a recipe of what's in our transportation plan. We know that it works because during that period of the Olympics, in that Olympic corridor, we in fact met that objective of over 50% of the trips during that period being by non-single occupancy vehicle.
So it's important that we know that it is a reality and or something that's achievable if we continue to work together towards that goal. And with that in mind, I think that wraps up the review of our base plan, our 2012 proposed base plan. If anybody has questions, please feel free to, if you're on the webinar, just type them in to your computer. And if you're on the telephone, I believe the correct instructions are to press *1, and you'll be speaking with an operator, and they'll transpose your questions for you. So with that in mind, we've got a couple of questions now, so I'll just pause. And again, at this point in time, we'd like to take just the questions on the base plan, because we know we're thinking quite a few of you will have several questions on the supplemental moving forward plan as we move ahead. So the first question is from Nathan, and Nathan would like to know how we're driving down the administrative costs that you spoke about at the beginning, Ian.
So when I speak about administrative costs, so we don't, they're not our direct operating or customer service impact. So things like our back office functions around finance, IT and support services. So what we've done is, to the extent practical, because we have our TransLink costs, we have our rail as a rail division and bus division, is looking at ways of putting functions together to reduce duplication, It's kind of the key thing that we've concentrated on over the last year or so. And I'd say in terms of the size of the executive team was one of the first areas that I looked at. And certainly we had the Controller General come in and review our operations back in the fall of 2009. So cited that specific area, and was one of the first things that we addressed was to reduce the size of the executive team. So those are a few examples.
Okay. And Nathan, hopefully that answers your question. We've got another question with respect to trolley routes, and a question around acknowledging that there is an increasing cost with respect to diesel. So if that cost continues to rise, would we look at using additional trolley routes to help mitigate that?
We would, as a planning agency, we constantly look at what the best propulsion systems are for our fleet and when it makes sense, and we update those analysis based on what the energy prices are likely to be. While there are significant capital infrastructure costs involved with putting in a trolley system or expanding the trolley system, those can be outweighed over time, and we need to monitor where fuel prices are both now and where we believe they'll be 10 years from now, to see what the payback and if that makes sense both from an economic sense and an environmental sense in putting in all that new infrastructure. It is worth pointing out that in this base plan and in this supplemental plan, we're assuming actually that fuel prices are going to be much higher than they have been in the past. And that's been a major change over the last 3 years. The prices, you've seen them at the pump, they've continued to rise, and we believe that right now we're planning for that being a long-term trend. And so that would definitely impact what those studies look like.
And I think beyond that, and Ian, I don't know if you want to speak to this, but understand that our finance team is looking at mitigating the costs of fuel prices by buying futures as much as possible.
So any in our business, trucking business or anything in transportation, fuel costs is one of our key risks. So what we're presently doing is locking in a portion of our fuel costs through fixed contracts, and actually staggering those, so that we mitigate the risk as well as the impact when there's spikes in fuel costs. The other area of risk is interest rates as well. So looking at ways to mitigate future increases in interest rates through putting out long-term financing now, and perhaps looking at other strategies to lock in so that we can manage through those risks.
We've got a question on the real-time bus information, and it's from Joseph on the internet. He is wondering if there's an additional cost that's anticipated for the average transit user, and I think I could probably respond and share with Joseph and everybody else that's listening and watching that no, there is no additional cost to the transit user. That has been factored in as part of our base plan for 2011, so the current base plan that we're operating within. Our next question is a bit of an interesting one, wanting to know if the three of us each take transit on a daily basis. So Ian, did you want to start?
Most days I take transit. In terms of my commute to and from home, I do go by vehicle. My hours of work are such that what works for me best. I will say, there was a time in my working career, and 12 straight years, where I took transit each and every day. It worked for me at that time, and the way that my work life worked, and it actually enabled us as a family to be a one-car family. In terms of trips, we are located on the Expo line, so most of my trips during the day to visit other locations and meetings, I use transit.
Okay, Jeff?
And I'm a combination traveler. I take my bike every day, and I bike to a SkyTrain station unless it's really sunny and warm, and it hasn't been that sunny and warm lately, but no, so every day I bike, rain or shine, about 2 kilometers, and then jump on the SkyTrain.
Great. And I am a daily transit user as well. I take the B line and jump on the Expo line and head into work every day. We've got a couple of other questions before we move on to the supplemental moving forward plan. So we'll just continue on with those now. Just wondering, we've got a question from someone on the internet, if TransLink's able to accept outside funding, such as from the private sector or added bus services and from developers to fund stations in particular.
Yeah, that is something that actually has been done on the Expo line. The station at Gateway Station was in fact a station that was financed by developers adjacent to that station. As well as in the city of Richmond, help me, Jeff, Capstan Station, which is a future station on the Canada line. There is a process of, I'll call it, volunteer contributions. It's basically an agreement, the city of Richmond and the development community and ourselves, that as development happens, dollars per unit go into a fund, and when there's adequate funds in there, that the station will be built from the proceeds. So that's certainly something that is used, and something that we examine and utilize here in our region.
Excellent. And our final question is with respect to debt servicing, and it's from Tomoko, who wanted to know or had the comment that 21% debt servicing is very high, and what are we doing to address this? And do we have any strategies to mitigate this cost at all? So again,
21% in terms, if we just look at the base plan, you'll know that we are a very capital-intensive business. So that, in my view, that level of debt in the range of 21% is very reasonable, given the nature of our services, and that's looked at because we go to the private markets. We issue debt directly. And we have a rating from Moody's Investors as well as Dominion Bond Rating Services. So that's something that they're mindful of. And they review our operations and our finances each and every year. So at the present level of 21%, I think we're well within that range of what is reasonable and our ability to service that debt. Okay. Now, going forward, when we expand, that's something we need to be mindful of, because with capital and if we finance it through borrowing, that will have an impact on that particular measure. And again, that's something that we will be mindful of as we build future plans.
Can I add to that, Ian, that one of the things we mentioned, we're going to be doing an update to our long-range plan, and looking at long-range affordability is going to be one of the key things. What can the region and the taxpayer, we're all one taxpayer, actually afford to put out there?
And that long-range plan is Transport 2045. I know that we're speaking quite often today about Transport 2040, which is our current 30-year outlook long-range plan. But as Jeff mentioned when we walked through our 2012 base plan, the Transport 2045 would be the next iteration of that particular plan. So with that, perhaps we should move into moving forward.
Okay, so just for those that were listening at the beginning of the session, we've talked about we're consulting on two plans: the base plan, which is really a plan that where we outline our programs and services within our existing resources. A supplement is a plan that where we need to access additional revenues over and above what is coming to us, or if we need to increase our level of borrowing, we do a supplemental plan. So really it's a plan that outlines where we're making significant additional investments. So the challenge for this region, and really what some of the context that we are planning a transportation system around, is really to meet the challenges of this region going forward. We know that 30 years out, we're going to have 1 million more people living here in this region. We have an aging population. Our travel patterns are different than they were 10 and 20 years ago. And we need to plan a system that is going to meet those needs. The other key factor, of course, is fuel costs. The cost of fuel is such that in order for services, transportation services to be affordable, the region needs to have alternatives for folks. So that is why it's important in moving forward that we make those investments in transportation. So, kind of really highlighting what I just touched on, we have kind of our guideposts that that we look at and it guides our strategies and plans. We refer to it as Transport 2040, which is simply 30 years out. What is our vision for the transportation system that this region will need in that period of time, influenced by population growth, development patterns, where people reside, where they work, aging population, etc. So again, back to that, my favorite slide, which is, in terms of where we put our dollars. The first priority is maintaining our existing services, keeping our assets in a state of good repair, upgrading the system before we look at expansion. So we don't want to put our existing services at risk by expanding the system and leaving ourselves short relative to maintaining our existing service levels. So the plan that we're putting forward, we refer to it as moving forward. Yeah, I think those that have an idea of what the base plan is, yes, there is some capacity for growth, but a couple of years out, we're going to hit a wall if we don't continue to invest and add additional investment in both the road and transit network. And so this is a plan moving forward that we had built last year, in the fall of last year. And the investments in this plan, which we'll highlight later on, is a suite of projects that are both our transit and roads and cycling and investment that serve the needs of across the region. We found in consultation that there was good support for those investments in the plan. When we took the plan forward to the Mayor's Council, they chose not to vote on it, and they chose not to vote on it because concerns relative to how it would be financed and funded. And the key concern was that there would be the use of property taxes. And from municipalities and the mayor's perspective, there's lots of other demands on that particular revenue source, so they're looking for other alternatives. And what has transpired between then and now is that a funding framework has been agreed to by the mayors in our region and the province. And so now we have a funding framework that, so we're basically guided by that, and we're building this supplement based on those investments we outlined in the fall of last year, and the funding framework that we'll touch on a little bit later in the presentation. So in pictorial form, it's probably, again, hard to read on the screens in front of you. You can see that really it's a suite of transit and road investments across the region, both to deal with the existing demand on our services today, to allow for growth in some of our emerging transit markets, restoring our level of funding in both the roads and cycling area, and of course to provide and enable the Evergreen Line to go forward, finding that the ability to commit to the $400 million long-standing commitment to the Evergreen Line project. Jeff, did you want to?
I would like to add to that. So these are not all the needs of the region. A couple of years ago, we started engaging people be part of the plan and looking a little bit on what's the track that we need to be on. And there are a number of them. Some of them we've identified in our rapid transit studies that we're working on right now. But this was a slice, right? This was sort of something that we needed to take on in the next 1 to 2 years, where the demand was already there, and we needed to do so in order to just keep up with that demand.
Yeah, that's important context, because again, the base plan, resources for the existing service hours, no growth. Mm-hmm. And you're right, back in the fall, the context then was, again, wanting to move forward on the Evergreen Line, so building a plan that, identifying those projects that were well scoped, well understood, had a good and positive benefit in terms of its investment. Those are the projects that sort of met the mark to build the moving forward supplement. So in terms of the funding package that I referred to, or the funding framework, so what the framework enables is access to additional fuel tax So it assumes 2 cents of additional fuel tax in the region to be implemented April 1st of next year, in addition to additional fare revenues that will come not from a fare increase, but from the additional services that are included in the plan. Also, a new regional revenue source. So what has been identified in the framework between the Mayor's Council and the province, examples of revenue sources that have been identified is a transportation improvement fee or a vehicle registration fee that's in our existing legislation, a regional carbon tax that could be implemented. So those are two sources that have been identified to date. The commitment is that the province and the Mayor's Council, with our support, doing the technical work and planning work to enable and identify the trade-offs on the various revenue sources, that would be identified and enabled in legislation in the spring of next year. If a alternative source is not identified within that time frame, then for the years 2013 and 2014 in the plan, that property tax would be utilized on a time-limited basis. But really, what another important point on this slide is the majority of funding for the additional investment, in fact, comes from senior government funding, and so that's things like the contribution to the Evergreen Line, the Building Canada Fund. So these are not asks; they are identified federal, provincial funding that we know that's available for those specific investments that are in the plan. And the impact of that, and it comes in the way of a capital contribution, so we don't have to borrow and we don't have to incur those debt service costs. So the avoided debt service costs is really what is included in this slide, and it's roughly equal to the other three sources that are identified in the plan. So really the point here is that it's we kind of emphasize the Evergreen Line a fair bit, but you can see that it's a combination of a number of investments, both in terms of station upgrades. The system's getting old. We need to put money into some of the stations. A number of new buses. I can't remember the number of new buses that are identified.
63.
63. I knew you'd know the answer. And then in terms of our road and cycling programs, bringing back that level of investment that was there back in 2009. So in terms of cycling, going from $3 million back up to $6 million per year, and in terms of the road investment, $20 million per year in capital, up from $10 million that's in our existing plan. And those, I don't want to underemphasize that the impact of those continued investments in roads, things like intersection improvements, left turn bays, etc., all designed to improve the flow of traffic along our major road network, which is important. Our buses utilize those roads as well as, of course, maintaining the economic viability of this region. We need goods and services to move through this region in an efficient way.
I could add that we just published our new regional cycling strategy, and that is definitely one of the most cost-effective modes at this point to invest in as well.
So that's kind of an overview. I'm going to turn it over to you, Jeff, to go through again some of the specific investments that are in this moving forward plan.
Thanks, Ian. Just one thing I'd like to hit before we leave this. The total investment package of this over the course of the next sort of 10 years, what this would leverage those senior government funds, is about $2.3 billion. So this is a very significant package. So we'd like to hit some of the real detailed, to at least a certain level, so people get a sense of what's in this package. And we'll be taking questions afterwards as well. So obviously the key one that gets a lot of press and that we're all aware of is the Evergreen Line. And that's an 11-kilometer extension going from Lougheed Mall out into Coquitlam. And it would have 5 new stations and would run with 3-minute frequency. And it's supported by about $1 billion in senior government, that's federal and provincial funding. to help deliver this new service. We're estimating that it would increase ridership by an additional 20 million boardings by 2020 after this comes online and is started to be absorbed by the community. One of the other key benefits and why we anticipate that it'll be quite successful is just the improved reliability and travel savings that we're anticipating from this. It would probably be 20 minutes faster to go from Coquitlam Centre to downtown via the new Evergreen line than a private automobile. In addition, we've got, and this is, we're trying to emphasize this a lot, we know that a lot of the bus routes out there are experiencing crowding and in some cases pass-ups. And we've identified, looking at those sort of critical needs over the course of the next couple of years, about 415,000 more bus hours and C-bus hours that we would add. About half of those investments would be made south of the Fraser, where we're seeing a lot of growth and where we were about ready to put in new services right when we entered into 2010, the end of 2009, and we had to go into a funding stabilization mode. So what we're looking to do is actually reduce crowding on some of the high-demand corridors, improve reliability and increase frequencies, and serve some of that new demand that's coming from population growth and the very successful UPass program that was expanded this year. So I'll hit some of the regional aspects of this. In the northeast sector, in addition to the Evergreen line, which would come on later in the horizon of this plan, we would see new direct services from Burquitlam Station to SFU. We'd be looking at increasing the capacity on some of the core routes and corridors, and at this point, we have a sense where some of those routes are experiencing pass-ups and very high demand. What the solution might be, we'll have to look at. What route it is, we're not quite sure yet, but we know where some of those services are warranted. Another one is Pine Tree Way.
And we know that Jeff's going through quite a bit of detail here. I really encourage you, if you have a question as we go, simply type it in if you're joining us via webinar. And if you're joining us via the telephone, please press *1 and you'll be connected to an operator and you can relay your question that way. And we'll get to all of the questions at the conclusion of the presentation.
Thanks, Erin. On the North Shore, one of the things that we're looking at is improving the frequency of C-Bus to 7 days a week, 15-minute frequency. Right now, it runs, other than in peak summer times, it runs on Sundays 30 minutes, and it ends in the evenings at around 7 o'clock at the 15-minute frequency. So we would extend that and bring it up to the standards of our frequent transit network to provide better reliability. With that, we would also have improvements to the bus services that integrate with that C-Bus, and we'd also see improvements in capacity and frequency along Marine Drive, along Lonsdale, and over the Lionsgate Bridge into downtown and into the rest of the network. In the central area, in New West, Vancouver, Richmond, we'll see improvements on really high demand corridors. And Burnaby, thank you, where we're sitting right now. We'll see examples of that where we know that services are warranted already. Are Canby Road, Queensboro Bridge, Willingdon Avenue, Main Street east-west corridors through Vancouver, such as like 4th Avenue, 41st, and 49th, where we have some really high demand, crowding, capacity, all sorts of things like that. So we'll be doing a lot of work on that. South of the Fraser, where about half of the service hours would be going, one of the key things that we're looking at is the Highway 1 BRT. We were looking at...
What does BRT stand for?
Thank you. Bus Rapid Transit, which means that we would have faster routes with a little bit more limited stops and improved frequency and large articulated buses, generally speaking. Thanks, Ian. I don't want to be too planneries on this. We were looking, as I was saying, putting that in 2010, and then when we went into funding stabilization, we were unable to do so. So that's one of the high demand areas. Is we also see that as a precursor to rapid transit, which we're looking at rapid transit in Surrey right now as well for the future. Another area is the White Rock to Langley bus service. This has been a connection we've wanted to put in for quite some time. And we would also have improved frequency along the King George and Fraser Highway, probably. Then we go into station upgrades, and our station upgrades are designed to get the most out of our existing rapid transit infrastructure. Many places we don't have the capacity, or the circulation is outdated, and we feel we actually can't service the demand effectively that it exists today, and we want to be able to protect our ridership so we can cost effectively invest in those stations and get more out of them towards our long-term goals. So examples of that, Surrey Central Station, there's a lot of interesting development going on in Surrey Central, and we would like to support that. So we're looking at a new exchange and transit plaza, new station entrances, integration with the municipal infrastructure like the recreation center, the library, and the city hall, and really helping Surrey realize the vision that they have for that area.
Yeah, that's really important from our perspective. The city of Surrey has a vision of a downtown, are investing in a new library facility that's there now, as well as City Hall moving there. So in order to support that type of development, which is the kind of development that we're looking for in our plans going forward, it's important that we work with them to get that transit infrastructure in place that complements what they're doing on the land use side.
Absolutely, and it would allow us, with these other bus services, high-frequency bus services that we're speaking about, to be able to accommodate that higher service level into that station. Metrotown Station is one of the busiest stations on the whole system, and it has got some circulation issues that we would be looking at addressing as part of this. We need a new entrance and bus exchange, new elevator and escalators. It's very slow and gets quite narrow, and we can't accommodate all the demand that exists there today. We need to renovate the existing entrance and remove accessibility barriers to bring it up to the standards that we like to see system-wise, and have a better pedestrian plaza and an improved station environment.
And again, we know that there's actually, I believe, 2 developments that are approved by the city of Burnaby that are going, pretty much adjacent to that station. And again, we gotta get that our infrastructure upgraded to deal with the additional volumes that are going to come with that transit-oriented development.
Yeah, thank you. New Westminster Station is another interesting one. There's a very significant private development going on there, Plaza 88, and we'd be looking at kind of leveraging the work that they're doing there to help facilitate better integration into the network by improving that station, which is starting to get outdated, needs better infrastructure around it, better wayfinding, needs to be integrated into the new development, and better station escalators, handrails, those kinds of things to make it seamless with that environment, so that if they're developing a transit-oriented community in that area, that we can support that and make transit effective and attractive. Commercial Broadway Station. This station is already the busiest station in the entire system, and if you've spent any time there at all, you can see why it's going to need some assistance and improve the capacity. And that situation is only going to get more emphatic if and when Evergreen Line goes in. And so we need to be planning for that at this time. We are going to be looking at expanding the platforms, actually adding another inbound platform on the east side of the station for the Expo line. We'd have upgrades to the bus waiting areas, a new pedestrian plaza on the south side, and we require these all really to help integrate the Evergreen Line into the bus system and the network and the rest, and facilitate movements into downtown. So it's going to be a very significant project. Main Street Station, similar to Metrotown, there's a lot of development obviously going on in southeast False Creek. This is the oldest station design in the entire network, and it's really a key multimodal transfer point, and we don't have the facilities to really accommodate that future growth. and there are huge opportunities if we can improve the capacity and integrate it into the system to really improve our mode share in that area and support the work that Vancouver is doing and the vision that they have for Southeast False Creek. So we'd be looking at expanded east entrance, new elevators and escalators, improved station environment, renovation to the existing entrance and remove the accessibility barriers, and a much better integration with the bus SkyTrain transfers. Lonsdale Quay is a very busy station, and right now it is not exactly the gateway that we see to the North Shore that we would like to have there. Many of you have traveled through there, whether you're commuting or you're going over to Lonsdale Quay for recreational opportunities, and that station really needs some upgrades both to things like lighting and to the passenger amenities, to the access up and down between C-Bus and the actual buses and the street levels. And we need to work on things like better lighting and ventilation so that it gets the treatment that it deserves and we can accommodate the increased passengers that we're anticipating going forward.
Just to note, I know you've gone through a number of proposed station improvements, and we often get the question, why now, with respect to our supplemental plan. One of the benefits is that regardless of the fact that these upgrades and improvements for flow and capacity need to be made anyways, we would be able to, if this plan is approved to go ahead, we would actually be able to make those improvements at the same time that we're installing the fare gates in our station. So that would, we often, again, get questions about cost efficiency and effectiveness. There would be an economy of scale there for us to be able to do both projects simultaneously without costing our customers too much of an impact and hardship, and then also being as cost efficient as we can.
Finally, Ian mentioned earlier, back in 2010 with the funding stabilization plan, part of that plan was actually to reduce the spending on the minor capital for major road network. We reduced that by $10 million, as well as we cut the cycling capital program to $3 million, and under this plan we would increase that back to those levels that we saw before and be able to support our multimodal mandate in this. So just a note on, so when would this happen, I'm sure is kind of a key question. If this was approved, in the plan we're projecting that we would incrementally phase in these projects. So the bus services, as soon as they were sort of operationally feasible, and there's a lot of steps that would have to happen, purchasing buses, hiring drivers, things like that, getting the infrastructure in place for those routes. But we see that by the end of 2012, we could probably have about half of the service hours in, and then the remaining half of those 415,000 hours would be in by the end of 2013. And as for the major road network capital funding and the bicycle funding, we could start that right away. Evergreen Line development process could begin right away. Our understanding is it's not our project, but that the province would be looking at going forward with an RFP in the fall and awarding a contract next year, and then a construction period to follow that. And my final slide for this is it's kind of a planner slide. We look at, what does this get us? I'm sorry, I know. But, where are we going? And one of our key mandates is to improve mode share, but that's in support of having a balanced transportation network.
And by mode share, what do you mean, Jeff?
Well, I mean the share between the different travel modes. So a mode being like a single occupant vehicle, ride share, transit, walking, cycling. And in some cases for this, we're showing how much people actually travel, vehicle kilometers traveled. It could be not making the trip at all because they have better amenities where they are, or they can trip chain. So we're looking at, in the course of this plan, a really significant change from historical trends where we could actually facilitate a reduction in the amount that people feel they need to drive just to accomplish their daily mobility needs. And so we'd actually have, for the first time, a reduction in vehicle kilometers traveled per capita, and that's because of shifts to other modes. And so that gets us a long way towards where we need to be.
And specifically towards our Transport 2040 goals.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So in terms of next steps, so we're wrapping up, or in the middle of consultation now, and we will be for the next couple of weeks. Our base plan must be submitted under legislation to the Commissioner 1st of August, and so our board will be presenting it to our board in the next couple of weeks for approval and over to the Commissioner for his review. And in terms of the supplemental plan, the additional step there is, again, we'll finish the consultation over the next couple of weeks, be before the TransLink board the first week of August, and then it goes to the Commissioner again for review. So the Commissioner looks at our plans to give assurance to the mayors and the public that the plan we put together, the assumptions and parameters that are in the plan are reasonable, so that it's based on reasonable assumptions and a solid plan. The supplemental is then, in order for, it needs to be approved by the Mayor's Council. And so the Commissioner has 30 days for his review, and then to the mayors for their approval, assuming this all goes forward, likely in the first or second week of September.
Okay.
And so just the last slide, again, emphasizing the point that from my perspective, there's choices. The base plan, we have sufficient funding to provide the service hours that are available to us now within our base plan. Our funding stable. The choice is: do we want to invest at this time to keep moving forward and making those investments that support the goals of our region, that provide additional choices, transit and other alternatives to our residents, investments that are required to maintain goods and services moving through our road network, so that is a choice that's before the region. Mayors, our board and the mayors will deliberate on it. If approved, we'll implement them. If not, we will continue to operate within the funding that we have now.
And I think one other point that you've both alluded to throughout our time so far tonight is that both the plans are based on priorities that we heard from the public and our customers that they really want. So not only when we went out in 2009 and consulted on our long-range planning, but also in 2010 when we did consultation last year on this particular plan. So with that, I know that we're getting rather close to the end of our hour together, but we do have some questions, and we are committed to responding and giving you the information that you're seeking out. So please do feel free to type in your question if you've got it, or press *1 on your telephone, and we can get a question through that way as well. So the first question, first a comment from Steve, who notes that we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to install turnstiles. Steve specifically is interested in knowing, why can't transit be free and financed by higher property taxes? Because in Steve's mind, that would get him out of his car.
Okay, so a couple of points there. In terms of the fare gates, it's part of a smart card and fare gate project. So from TransLink's perspective, the reason that we're moving ahead on a smart card is that it will enable us to improve our customer service. It will be a more easy and convenient way for folks to utilize the system, and to reload the card for additional rides on the system. Enables us to implement, if we a more robust fare system. It also gives us good information. Right now, we have very weak information relative to usage on our system. So, when the system is used, where it's used, and what time of day. So, with that information, we're better able to plan our services as well, and then therefore provide the services when they're required by our customers. That total project for fare gates and smart card is $171 million. The fare gate portion is in the range of $90 million. I realize there's only one taxpayer, but $90 million is coming from senior government, from the federal government and provincial government, with the balance being the purchase of the smart card system and technology that's required to enable that. So to that point number one, it's not hundreds of millions of dollars. In terms of why not make transit free and cover the costs through property taxes or other measures, that's a choice. There are implications to that, like any goods or service. If you don't put a price to it, you can't effectively utilize that resource. In other words, if you don't put a price to it, you might have to it will be overutilized. By having a price to it, encourages people that need it to use it when they need it. If we went to a free system, you'd get into discussion around fairness and why, if I don't use the system, why am I paying for it? That certainly is an alternative.
Correct, and I guess maybe it might be prudent for us to note that it's not actually our role to necessarily advocate which funding sources we should be utilizing.
No, I think what we need to do as a transportation authority is to understand our system, do the policy work around whether it's level of investment or what the choices are to pay for the system. Do that good, solid, evidence-based work, and put those alternatives and the trade-offs to the policymakers, which in our current structure is in the end the Mayor's Council working with the provincial government.
Right, good point. We've had a couple of different questions from various folks that are joining us tonight, and the gist of their question tends to be, I never ride transit, so what does any of this really mean for me? Where's the benefit to me, and why should I pay for it?
So the first point is it's not just about transit. We do, in addition to transit, we have responsibility with our municipalities to plan and finance and operate a system of roads. We refer to it as the major road network, which is a network of roads that services major activity centers within our service areas. So that, in addition to cycling programs, so our programs are not just transit. I would argue that the nature of transportation services is that users benefit as well as others benefit from there's a benefiters. There's an advantage to benefiters as well. I'm being a bit convoluted here. Everyone benefits from a good regional transportation system. So you don't use transit, well, you procure goods and services. Your milk and bread that's delivered at your local Safeway store or Bilo or whatever gets there by a truck. So an effective transportation system gets goods and services to where you procure, so you benefit. The fact that others by choice and it works for them, use transit, frees up road space for those that are required to use it, because if you need to drive a car, or again that important factor of moving goods and services, it frees up road space for those. So you look at a bus, you look at a train, the capacity of the folks that are on those services. If you thought of those being in single occupancy vehicles, it would take up a lot of road space. So I would argue that everyone benefits from a good transportation network and system.
Okay. Anything to add there, Jeff?
Well, we also, one of the things that we are mandated with doing is supporting other objectives, social and environmental, and public transit, cycling, walking, encouraging those modes also help us further towards those goals as well.
Right, and by lowering our GHG emissions
Exactly.
in particular.
Yeah.
Okay. Have a question with respect to the Evergreen Line and what impact, if any, it might have on the West Coast Express. So if and when the Evergreen Line comes online, would the West Coast Express from Coquitlam onwards be discontinued?
There's no plan to discontinue it. Certainly it will have an impact on ridership. So people will have a choice to connect into the regional rapid transit network, and it might work better for some folks that are currently using West Coast Express. So again, we're challenged with respect to demand for West Coast Express, and so the impact of the Evergreen Line will provide some capacity for the growth in ridership that we know is going to happen with development out in Coquitlam and Port Coquitlam and Maple Ridge.
Yeah, and many of those trips that are being made from further east, from communities out there, they're not necessarily looking to make a transfer. They're going to downtown, and it's quite comfortable and effective to stay on that vehicle, the one trip all the way to downtown into the hub or wherever it is that they're going. So there are different purposes for those two different lines.
Okay. We've got a question from Max in Langley. And actually, I should note that that last question was from Mike, joining us via webinar. Max in Langley is wondering or wanted to make the comment, as a taxpayer, what concerns me is why are drivers of motor vehicles being discriminated against? Because the true cost of operating a vehicle is greater than the people who use TransLink buses and other modes of transportation.
So I'm not certain I'm understanding the question totally. Is it actually, Karen, can you read it to me again?
Sounds like Max's concern is that the true cost of operating a vehicle is greater than the cost to those who are using the buses and other modes of transportation. So he's got concerns specifically, it sounds like, the single occupant vehicle operators.
No, you go ahead, Jeff.
Well, one of the things that I would potentially, if I'm interpreting that right, is that the private vehicle owner feels that they're paying all the costs of their vehicle, and it is expensive. But there are other costs that the rest of the region and other taxpayers actually subsidize with those trips. As Ian pointed out, a lot of the investment that's going to come out of this, another $10 million into major road network capital. We invest that money into the major road network and into our bridges and things like that, as well as the public transportation system. By diverting trips from the roadways allows us to get more out of that capacity. And if that system was not in place, we would have to build, if it was possible even, build more lanes, which would continue to be expensive, which would require more money from different taxpayers or different sources.
Another way of answering, maybe in this specific instance, it might be a situation where he doesn't have a choice. He needs to operate a vehicle, and saying it's expensive to operate a vehicle, why are you going to in terms of the new revenue sources hitting the vehicle user? That comes into that argument around trade-offs and fairness and equity, and again, those are the trade-offs and decisions that we make. Their arguments for fuel tax in terms of its user pay, and that your charge varies by your increase in the amount that you drive. On the other hand, you can argue that no, everyone benefits from a regional transportation system, so more should come from general taxation sources. So, I mean, I think he's indicating the specific impact in his specific circumstances, and those are the issues that we struggle through to find a way of paying for an investment that everyone benefits from in a fair and equitable way.
With that, we've also had a number of different questions from a variety of you tonight with respect to specific bus routes in particular and the service levels on those very specific routes. Again, I think it's important to note that we are in the planning phases, so we're not necessarily able to answer the specific questions about what service is going to change if and when the supplemental moving forward plan is approved. But that said, I think Jeff did identify the key areas throughout the region that would receive the upgrades. I know off the top of my head we can say the UPass BC routes in particular that we're seeing chronic overcrowding on, those would be looked at. Beyond that, maybe, Jeff, you could give us a little bit more information on what that planning process is and how you work with perhaps each of the municipalities in the area when you're looking at altering service and what steps you take.
Yeah, one of the key things that we do are area transit plans that we actually look to, that we engage in and on a sort of sub-regional perspective, where we're looking right now at the North Shore Area Transit Plan, where we work very closely with the residents and the municipalities to try and achieve their goals. So we understand, what the nature of those objectives are and where they believe demand is going to be going in the future. We're building out some of the South of Fraser Area Transit Plan right now. And so we look to that as guidance to where we're going to actually put our services. And we also look to our forecasting and monitoring services that look at how our bus services are performing right now to understand where there's key crowding issues, where there's pass-ups, things like that. And then we work with Coast Mountain Bus Company, our delivery system for the bus services to see what the most effective way to deal with that demand issue might be. And it might not be the specific route, it might be another route that actually overlaps that could happen. One of the other initiatives we have going on right now is the service optimization initiative that we talked about earlier, and that has a consultation phase as well.
And I think beyond that, wanted to point out that we do really hear feedback from our customers on a daily basis. So whether it is feedback that you're posting on our Facebook page or giving to us via Twitter, or that you're submitting by phoning in or through our customer feedback form on our website, all of that information on the specific routes and your concerns about those specific routes is passed along to Jeff and the planning team, as well as the folks at Coast Mountain Bus Company, which are really running the day-to-day operations of those specific routes. So want you to know that you are being heard in that regard. Our final question, and I think probably an apropos one to wrap our webinar up with, is what happens if the supplemental moving forward plan is not approved?
So if it is not approved, we will continue to provide the service that's there on the street today and the funding for roads and cycling that's there today. So we've got funding, stable funding to provide those services. What we, as you indicated, Aaron, what we hear from customers, from municipalities, and from the goods movement industry is that we need to invest. If we want to maintain the livability and economic viability of this region, we need to continue to invest. And there's solid support for the investment plan. We heard that loud and clear in the fall. But if there's concerns with respect to finding a way to pay for those investments, then we will fall to our base plan. What it will mean for the region is that it will fall farther behind. So what that means is, again, we got 1 million more people coming to the region. The economy continues to grow, and we need to move goods and services through the region. Is that we will experience congestion, and congestion has an impact on business in terms of the time it takes to deliver those goods and services, and the amount of equipment and resources that's applied to that, and therefore costs and economic viability. What it means to the average family is that commute times, will get longer, and probably more the trip times less predictable. So it has an impact on planning, your family life, etc. So that comes down to that favorite word that planners use. It's trade-offs. There's benefits that come through investments, and in my view, there's a cost of not continuing to invest. The quality of life and the economic viability of the region is impacted.
All right. And with that, would very much like to thank everybody for taking time out of their evenings to join us. And hopefully we've been able to shed some light on the moving forward plan and the host of improvements that we're proposing in addition to just the Evergreen Line, as well as our 2012 base plan, which would be our base operating framework for 2012. Would really encourage everybody to go on our website. If you haven't already, we've got an opportunity to submit additional feedback and input on the base and supplemental plan. So that's located right off the homepage of our website and is found directly on translink.ca/be part of the plan. This webinar will also be posted for the next few weeks. So if you know friends or family or coworkers that are interested in what we're doing with respect to transportation in the region and our planning processes, please encourage them to come back and visit the website, and they'll be able to view this webinar in its entirety. Finally, if you've got any questions in addition to what we have covered today, or you want to talk a little bit more specifically, I've got a phone number for you. You can call 604-453-3093, and I'll repeat that. That's 604-453-3093. So in closing, we've had a lot of questions tonight. We have recorded some of the other ones that have come in via the web and the phone, and we will be responding to you after the fact as very best that we can. So thanks again for joining us, and Ian and Jeff, thanks very much to you as well.
Thank you, Erin.
Thanks everyone.
Jeff.